less than a year in, Panthers owner David Tepper is tasked with finding a new head coach yet again to lead the team.
Tepper has now tapped special teams coach Chris Tabor to be the new interim head coach. Tabor has 30 years of coaching experience. He has spent time on the collegiate level and in the pros. He worked with the Cleveland Browns. He worked with the Chicago Bears. Now, Frank Reich was not the only coach let go yesterday. Other coaches include the assistant head coach and running backs coach Deuce Staley. We also saw quarterbacks coach Josh McCown get fired. They were fired by Tabor, not by Tepper. And both of those decisions, of course, coming from Tabor. He said it's a question of personalities and how well they work together.
And joining us now live outside Bank of America Stadium is WBTV anchor Jorge Andrés.
And Jorge, a lot to talk about here. You've done a lot of sports reporting in your time, and you've got some great insight into this. Tepper has now gone through 6 total head coaches. That includes the interims. His next hire is going to make head coach number 7. So what can you tell us? What did you think? What do you take from his news conference today?
John and I, it was very interesting to hear David Tepper address the media on the Frank Reich firing, rather. But not only that, but there were a couple of very good questions, I think, that were asked regarding Bryce Young, regarding his tenure as owner and the turnaround that we've seen in such a short time. That's where I want to start. The turnaround that we've seen in such a short time. You guys mentioned it. So many coaches. In this case, Frank Reich not even finishing a full season, just 11 games with a 1-10 record. And he said, and this is the truth, he is a fan. He was a fan. He shares the frustration every single Sunday. Now, what I did find surprising, though, was that he shared that he was a fan. However, he lets the decisions be made by the football people. And I want to take a moment there and take a beat, because he could say that, but it hasn't looked that way. At least on the outside looking in, it certainly doesn't look like that. Then he followed that up, that answer up, with another answer regarding Bryce Young. There has been a lot of speculation for weeks and weeks and weeks and months that ownership wanted Bryce Young and that the coaching staff wanted C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud, who's in the MVP conversation and is having a phenomenal year with the Houston Texans and putting them in the postseason thus far. So when he was asked if he did have a hand in selecting Bryce Young and not C.J. Stroud, what I found very interesting is that he said that he, of course, as the owner of a team, has a veto for any decision that is made. However, when it comes to selecting the quarterback and when it comes to selecting Bryce Young, he trusted his football people. He trusted the coaching staff, and he trusted Frank Reich. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say who's telling the truth and who's not, who's saying what. That's not my job. My job is just to tell you what he said and what's been reported out there. And several outlets, very credible outlets, have reported that both Josh McCown and Frank Reich, in fact, wanted C.J. Stroud, and ownership wanted Bryce Young. So the muddling of it then that's where it begins. That's where it starts. That's where people start pointing fingers. And then, that's where people start saying, well, maybe this is a fan knee-jerk reaction. Now, I do sympathize with David Tepper, because he, as a fan, wants to see this team win, and he has made large improvements outside of the field when it comes to Bank of America Stadium, when it comes to the community in Charlotte, when it comes to the Carolinas. He mentioned that there were only 10 different acts that came to Bank of America Stadium before he purchased the team. Now there's a soccer team. Now we reported on QC Morning and QC at 3 all the time the number of concerts that are Bank of America and the economic lift that has been going on since his tenure. That is one positive thing, and that is one thing I do agree with David Tepper. However, on the football side of things, that's where it's getting a little muddled, and I found it very surprising for him to come out and say that when asked that question specifically about Bryce Young.
And I think, too, Jorge, you were talking about the coaching decisions and such as that. He also said this about the decisions that are made, right or wrong, it all comes back to him. And he said, hey, the buck stops here. So he's not trying to push this off on anyone else, although he did emphasize how the coaching staff had made the decision about Bryce Young. That's what he's saying, that they made a decision, and he agreed with their decision. He says the coaching staff did that on all the decisions there. So Tepper is not avoiding controversy. He did speak to the press today, and he did answer questions. I wish he might have stayed a little bit longer, though, and answered a few more questions. But what about Tabor now, though, Jorge? You know that he's been in the NFL since, 2008, college coaching before that, but he's never had a head coaching job before. What do you think he's going to be able to do? And do you think it might be a possibility that he'll be considered for the permanent head coaching job?
That's right. Look, Chris Tabor also addressed the media, John, Naya, and he specifically addressed the team in the sense of that he's keeping things in-house. He has that relationship. He addressed the team, and he told them what his vision is. He told them what he wants this team to do. Now, whether his tenure is only 6 games and an interim basis, or if he does get the head coaching job next year, he's a candidate to get that. Thomas Brown is also a candidate to get the head coaching job. Thomas Brown will be calling the plays in these remaining 6 games, so perhaps he gets thrown into the mix. This team is an offensive team, and I say that because they mortgaged the future to have results on offense with Bryce Young. Arguably 5 NFL starters, 4 draft picks, and DJ Moore are out the door. So that when you mortgage the future like that, you have to have results on the offensive side. And I think his opportunity is to game manage and manage his coaches, which is what special teams coordinators do best in these remaining 6 games, in order for him to have a legitimate shot at staying and removing that interim head coach tag. In that same breath, I'll say that Thomas Brown, his job is to call the right plays in these remaining 6 games for him to be considered. And I really think, and this is just my personal opinion, I really think that both of these coaches really need to wow both Tabor and Brown to be able to be considered next year, because we know other coaches out there, specifically offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, Ben Johnson, is out there, is available. Tepper liked him. He wanted to hire him last year before Johnson declined the interview and remained with the Detroit Lions. So I think the idea here for both Tabor and for Brown is to make a splash very quickly in the last 6 games, so that they do have a legitimate shot at removing the interim tag and becoming head coach next year.
Jorge, you are absolutely right. And Tepper even was asked about, do you think it will be difficult finding a new head coach? And he confidently said no. So it will be interesting.
It's going to be very interesting. Let's see. We've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming up this coming weekend, and that game has been flexed. It was initially a 1 o'clock game. They flexed that to 4:05, and then after that, it's going to be at the New Orleans Saints. So got a couple of really tough games coming up here, Jorge. Do you want to make a prediction?
I will make a prediction, but before I do that, I want to just comment real quick on Naya's comment, because I also laughed and chuckled a little bit when he said emphatically, he was like, no, I'll have no problem. And I chuckled at that because Kristen Miranda and I spoke about this on other shows. How much money is Frank Reich getting out the door? Matt Rule, other coaches, that's a ton of money that you're paying guys pretty much to leave. Well, here's the thing, guys. David Tepper is worth almost $21 billion. So $20 to $40 million that you have to pay a coach is nothing. And if a Ben Johnson or even one of the interim coaches here in Carolina ended up staying and they give him a big contract, that's a drop in the bucket for David Tepper. So I think he's right when he says, nope, I'm not going to have a problem, because money attracts talent. And whether there's things around it or not, we'll see. But I don't think they're going to have an issue. It's still an NFL job. It's still a coveted job. Now, to answer your question, John, I agree. I think the Tampa Bay game is the game that I circle, because if there is a winnable game in these last 6 games, it's the Tampa Bay game, because that team is struggling mightily. This defense for Carolina has played well. The offense hasn't really, but the defense really has. So there could be an opportunity there to maybe salvage 1-2 wins at most, but it's a tough task with just 6 games left on the schedule.
Yeah, it is a tough task. Going to be something to watch to see what happens here. Jorge, thank you. Some great insight there into what's happening with the Carolina Panthers. Again, David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, speaking to the media today, as well as Chris Tabor, who is the new interim head coach. So we'll see what happens.
And of course, anything could change, and it could change by the minute. And that's why we're here to keep you updated. Of course, we will have an update for you on WBTV News at noon. And you can go to WBTV.com.